All right, let's get into the books then. We got Batman issue 404, not found. So this is
That was terrible.
this is Frank Miller writing. Back when Frank Miller wasn't like a name to fear when he was writing the comic book. Although art is by Dave Mazazuki, if I'm pronouncing that right. Or is it, sorry,
Go on.
Mazzucchelli.
Mazzucchelli, I think.
Mazzucchelli, that sounds right. There you go. You know what? One name should not have.
You're adding in an extra A after the Z's.
My problem with this is that one name should not have 3 double letters. It plays tricks in my eyes. I can't process it.
That is fair.
I can't process it. All right, so this is the start of year 1, which is a book that obviously we've both read before because it's Batman year 1. In fact, this was literally the first comic book I ever read.
It wasn't for me, but what I think is probably notable, at least definitely on my part, and I suspect on yours, the first time we've ever read it not in one sitting.
Oh, yes.
And like spaced out the issues like it was actually released and is a completely different experience.
If you'd asked me what the end of like the first issue was before I read it for this, I would never have been able to tell you what part it was.
Yeah, I've read this book probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. A reasonable amount. And I have never read it except in just sitting down and reading the entire thing. Maybe I've taken a break somewhere in the middle, but not issue by issue. No, never. Yeah.
So Batman 404. It's kind of funny actually. Just like I'm imagining like getting comics in the 80s and it being like, oh, by the way, we're doing a 4-issue arc of Batman's origin, and it's not even that weird to think about. Obviously, we did 0 year for like 11 months in 52.
I think it feels weird because so far what we've experienced is 2-issue arcs at most.
Yes. So 4 feels like an epic.
In comparison to what we've had so far, it really does.
Yeah. What's interesting though is just how much the tone's changed. Now, obviously, we enjoyed the last couple issues of Batman. We very much praised issue 402. 402, we thought was, that's actually really good. It's quite surprising. But what's interesting is just how the difference. It still looked like a comic from the time, and then you go to this one, and right away it has this gritty, grungy, down to earth feeling.
I think so much of the key difference that we're going to talk about in the art is the colors.
Oh yeah, it's not those bright blue capes anymore or anything like that. It's
this really muted color palette. Lots of dark purples, and the yellows don't stand out. They're like really faded. It's so different.
Now, obviously, we actually ended up liking the last couple of issues quite a bit. So I'm not saying this to sort of insult the storytelling, because it was actually much closer to a good Batman story, or was a good Batman story, than I was expecting. So I don't really mean to throw shade on it with what I'm about to say, but it really kind of feels like before there was like a kid's cartoon, and then someone turned on the HBO version. Like you open the first page of this, it's like, oh, this is the adult version of Batman. we're reading like a...
Yeah. I just want to give a shout out. Richmond Lewis did the colors. I feel like, he deserves a particular shout out, given how key the colors are in defining the feel and tone of how different this feels to everything that we've just read before this.
It wasn't actually that bad, but you were digitizing a touch there, just a touch.
I thought you were saying like I was saying it weirdly. I was like, I don't think I did.
No. It was. I mean, it's starting to clear up already. It was just clear the connection was, stuttering for just a moment. But if you've not read year 1, it starts off with Gordon arriving into Gotham on a train. He's just moving here, and all he talks about is how much of a cesspit it is, and how much he does not want to raise a kid here. He doesn't want to bring his pregnant wife here. He hates it. He's not happy about it. And he says, "Oh, I bet all the high and mighty like fly into the city." And there's this wonderful duality where we, at the bottom of the page, we get Bruce flying in, complaining that he's in the sky above the city. He wants to be amongst the people on a train. So you have this weird kind of, two sides of the same coin.
Grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah. So, and Bruce is like dodging press. Gordon meets Flash, and Flash is like, hey, cops got it made in Gotham, all that stuff. We get introduced to Commissioner Loeb. So much of what we think of as the early part of Batman's career comes from this book. Because in my head I'm like, yeah, Commissioner Loeb. So of course Commissioner Loeb's commissioner when Batman
Yeah,
starts.
it's kind of incredible just how much is in this book. Like, and we know this is year one. It's stupidly influential. It's everywhere. But I think you forget just the amount of details that are in it as well that you just take for granted now.
Yeah, Flash, Loeb, like all these things, like Gordon thinking he can try and fit in, but immediately, Flash goes out and beats up some punks for no reason. Says, "Oh, he had this on him," and Gordon's like, "It's a comb. It's a switch comb. It's not a knife. Like, why did you beat him up over it?"
But there are lots of iconic moments that you remember as, of course, that's from year one. But then there is the smaller things like that you kind of brush over in your memory, I think.
Yeah. And we see Bruce training. We see, like, because again, Bruce doesn't know he wants to be a Batman yet. He wants to fight crime, but he doesn't have a clue about being a Batman yet. But you have Flash getting in the commissioner's face about, Gordon's not fitting in. He's writing people up for being brutal or taking bribes. He wouldn't accept a bribe himself. He's just not fitting in. And the commissioner's like, "Look, there's enough heat in me from the mayor and the internal affairs as it is. Wait until I'm out of town in a few weeks before you do it, and before you rough him up."
I need a good alibi.
Yeah, and sure enough, they show up in mass and beat up Gordon. Wonderful stuff. Silhouettes, the coloring really kind of changes here versus the rest of it.
Everything shifts to these deep reds and oranges and this burgundy, and it just feels dangerous in comparison.
Yeah, and Bruce is like putting on a disguise. He's giving himself a scar so he can walk amongst the thugs and see
I love
what.
that line about a single memorable distracting detail, and it reminded me of the key features of every Bond villain, essentially, as they've all got one thing, and very intentionally so. Like they all have some sort of feature that makes you go, "Oh, that's that Bond villain." And obviously that would have been quite popular at the time. So I wonder if there was something kind of inspired by that.
I think what gets me reading this, especially compared to the issues before, is just the tone. Like there's so much atmosphere.
Yeah.
When Gordon's like getting laid out with a baseball bat and he's lying there and he's like, I recognize that chuckle as Flash. Like it feels helpless. It feels like, oh shit, you're surrounded by people who are supposed to be able to confide in.
Yeah, one of my favorite moments there is what you just said. Is it's not it's flat. It just says Flash. Like just the one word. It cuts through so much more. And I think again, we talk about how year one, you kind of forget how influential it is. I think you kind of forget that Frank Miller used to be able to write.
Oh yeah, really well. The only thing I really want to critique is that narration for Bruce is the lettering's a bit too scripty for my liking.
Cursive.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's definitely a worse cursive than that, though.
No, there is. I actually didn't struggle too bad with this. I think there was only like one or two words in the entire issue that I kind of had to think about.
It definitely gets to a point where like I refuse to try and figure things out. So unless it's like something that makes a sentence like hard to understand, I just won't bother trying to figure out a word that I don't get. I'll just keep going and just.
Did you have that in this issue?
A couple, not a lot, but there was definitely a couple here or there.
Fair enough.
Where if the shape of the word overall doesn't just strike me as something obvious.
Yeah.
But yeah, and obviously we get introduced to Selina, who is now a prostitute, and Holly's like this younger prostitute, and Bruce gets into a fight with the pimp.
Yep, as he does.
So yeah, giving you this sort of more again down and dirty. Selina jumps down because it's like he was. I mean, it wasn't actually attacking Holly. Holly just kind of tried to stab him, and he just kind of grabbed her to stop her rather. And Selina jumps down, and the police show up, and he has to run, and he gets caught, and the police put him in the back seat, and he essentially has to make them crash to get out. But obviously he saves them. That's one of the key details, is that when we hear about the next day, is that the two policemen were found 30 feet from the car.
Yeah. Do you know, this is one of those moments where, again, I'd kind of forgotten, in the sense that when we got Zero Year, and this is not to shit on Zero Year as much as I know Pete would like to.
Do it.
No. There was a whole thing about how this is not Batman at year one. He's, at year one, he's ready, he's prepared, and it's as much as Zero Year. This is actually a Batman Earth one as well, the Jeff Johns one, where he's making tons of mistakes. He's so green. He's not actually ready to be Batman. And people say year one, he was ready to go. That's it. He was just off. And he was so prepared. And I'm like, in his first encounter out, he got shot and arrested.
Yeah, he does terrible this first night. I love this first night out though. is the same night that Gordon gets beat up, and then Gordon gets a baseball bat and like goes to find Flass and waits for him. I mean, Gordon not only beats him up, but he actually, I mean, well, first of all, there's the fact that he drives past Bruce, because Bruce actually speeds past them. They almost hit each other. There's a nice little, crossing the lanes there. But he beats up Flass to the point where he strips him down naked in the snow and leaves him there, just because he knows that he won't report it. He knows that he won't admit to anyone that Gordon did this to him.
Yeah, one of my favorite narration bits with this, when he was like, he's big, he's got Green Beret training, so obviously you're like, okay, this guy's good. He's like, it's been 15 years since I had to take out a Green Beret. And he's like, oh shit, okay, Gordon can handle himself, like more than maybe he had let on so far.
Yeah, but he also gives him a baseball bat. He says he should have a handicap to make this fair. He says that. So what I love about this is the idea that Gordon is already kind of making himself a lesser cop to just survive in Gotham. Obviously he's not giving up his morals, but the fact that he has to come and beat the shit out of him like this just so that he'll stay away from his family is really kind of okay, the city's done this to him already. So later on in the story, when we're well from this yet, but later on when he's willing to maybe accept the idea of a vigilante like Batman to help fix the city, it's what the city's done to him in moments like this that make me believe it. That make me go, no, he's looking for something alternative, because the regular rules just aren't working. He's trying his best to obey them, but it's impossible.
He's understanding that Gotham is broken.
Yeah. And that's when we get to, in the middle of this is a flashback of the Wayne murder, because of course, I mean, it's the Batman origin, there should be, after all. But he's sitting there and he's basically saying that, Alfred was left to him from his parents, and if he rings this bell, Alfred will come and patch him up, but if he won't, he'll die. And he's basically considering just not ringing the bell, because he doesn't know what to do. He's like, Father, what should I do? What should I do? He doesn't know. And then after the flashback, that famous page, the last page of this first issue, the famous image of the bat crashing through the window. And it's one of those things where up until this point there's been no mention of bats of any kind, and to the point where I was like, does it even mention that this was something that was from his childhood? And he does say this frightened me as a boy. So it's in there. It's just so funny to me though, because I always think of his origin as being so the idea of him being scared as bats as a kid to be something that's really so ingrained in.
Was that something that came from Begins, or was it established kind of before that?
What do you mean?
Like Batman Begins, like the movie obviously established that really core in its opening act, that he was that like this as a kid, and obviously this mentions it here that he was friends as a boy. But is there a lot more of this? I don't recall in the comic.
I don't know if there's much more. I mean, I think Begins definitely embellished on the idea of the necessity to have a symbol and use a symbol. It's just one of those key factors that have kind of, because here he says he wants to scare people, but how can he scare them? And then the bat comes in, he's like, oh, this frightened me as a boy. Begins definitely took that torch and ran with it a bit more.
Because I think now I feel like I've seen a handful of comics, at least in a post Batman Begins world, that have kind of really run with that and embellished it and kind of gone, no, we're playing up the childhood trauma of it.
I think that's one of those things where we talk about how Killing Joke or Year One, where technically, I mean, this was in continuity because it was in the main book and it was supposed to be the new origin, but even now when we've reset things a couple of times since, it's still kind of considered the origin of Batman. It kind of feels like, the way we take from this and Killing Joke, I feel like Batman Begins, even though it's a movie, it still had that effect, where there's a couple of things like that are still no, they're now ingrained into Batman as a character, where the way it added into the importance of the symbol and the importance of how scared he was of the bats as a kid, and why that's so important to him to overcome that, to sort of make it what he uses against criminals. I feel like that is kind of Begins, at least to a point, because again, like I say, it existed in some form before then, but the emphasis on it in that movie, I think, has informed a lot of new versions of Batman stories.
That's what I mean. That's why I was wondering if it was Begins that kind of ran that, because it is a really nice feedback loop in the sense that the comics kind of, it's definitely established here as a concept in its very basic infancy, but I can't think of anything else between this and Begins that really kind of ran with it in that way. There's
no really other big versions of his origin between this and Begins, so I guess if it did come up, it would have been some sort of story where he it comes up in present day and he sort of harkens back to it. That might have happened, and we'll find out because we're going to read all of it. But
exactly.
But nothing springs to mind for me either. But Yeah.
But this
So
is such an iconic moment, isn't it? Yes, Father, I shall become a bat. It's ingrained into Batman now. That is the moment.
yeah. What's funny about this is the one thing that Begins actually played down is that the moment he sees a bat, it's not this big dramatic moment where he's lying dying, and because that's the final panel here is him ringing the bell so that Alfred will come save him.
Him choosing to live.
Yeah. Beautiful moment, but Begins like the moment where the bat comes in, it's just he's just sitting there like, doing some research or whatever. The bat just kind of appears. Obviously, they shift it so the dramatic moment's him facing his fear and standing up amongst the bats, which I love that moment. So I'm not complaining about this, but the actual bat coming in is just like a sort of like, oh, there's a bat in here. Oh.
Yeah, that's more just oh hey, bats. That gives me an idea in that movie, and like I say, it has the big dramatic beat with him facing it, but it's different, not in a bad way. I love that stuff.
Yeah,
love that movie.
So yeah, that's the issue. It's just so weird to stop there. I'm so used to like say reading.
Just go into the next bit.
Yeah, it's weird. It's funny because like if you'd asked me like before again what was in each issue of year one, I wouldn't have been able to tell you. I mean, obviously I knew the arriving the train was at the start because it's obviously the start, but other than that, and the ending's obviously the ending, but everything in between
could kind of happen. Like, yeah, I can kind of tell you. Well, that's the ending area of the book. But if you tell me it happens in issue 3 and not 4,
that said, I can tell you one of the cliffhangers actually between issues is when he's trying to escape the building, and it's either just before or after he's called the bats in for help. Because I vividly remember like the SWAT team kind of coming in for him either at the start of one of the issues. So I think that's either the end of issue 2 or 3. I don't know which one though. We'll find out.
Fair enough. Like I said, I could not tell you any individual moment that is in a specific issue from here on out.
Yeah. No, I think what's so impressive about year one, reading it especially in this context, having read the few issues before it, is just how much of a shift it is.
It's hard to imagine just how seismic this shift was at the time. Right?
And obviously, Dark Knight Returns was first, so there was like kind of the seed for it that sort of said, hey, maybe Frank Miller should do some sort of new version of the Batman origin, right? There was a seed for it. But we talked about taking things. Now, obviously, a lot of the plot details from Dark Knight Returns has never been taken into mainline continuity. It never should be because it's such a weird sort of futuristic, brutal version of Batman. But this idea of having a grittier, more down to earth sort of one that we can understand and making it, and obviously very clearly inspired as well by Frank Miller's own Daredevil stories, which predate these Batman stuff. His Daredevil from the end of the 70s into the early 80s, which I've read actually, is really good. Like it's fantastic.
Like the first couple of volumes in Comixology, I think. I've never actually touched them.
I never, because there's like his big story from later, like Born Again or whatever it's called. I've never read that, but the actual the first run that he did, I read all of. And I think that was when he introduced Elektra. I think that was her first appearance. I could be wrong, but I think it was.
Yeah, I've definitely got at least a couple of the trades, if not all of them. I just have never read them. Maybe quarantine's the time.
But you can definitely feel it. You can definitely feel reading those stuff that is definitely the same guy who went on to do Batman Year One, and for whatever reason, maybe just because Batman's the bigger character, but I think Batman Year One is kind of the one that sticks out. Not the biggest story, because Dark Knight Returns is the one that's always brought up first, even though I think Year One's the better of the two. But I mean, it is what it is. It is what it is. But the tone shift is so good. It feels like the type of Batman you want to be reading, to the point where, do you know what I'm actually really fascinated by? The first issue of Batman after this arc. Like,
is it gonna feel like we're stepping down?
Like, does it try to kind of incorporate some of the new tone with the old stuff, or does it just completely go back to what it was before and like, oh,
it's hard to say because we know not too far from here we get in terms of real world time we're getting to like Nightfall and stuff. Yeah, and the build before all of that.
Well, we got death in the families before all that, though. So
no, it is, but I'm just going a little bit further out. And when I say a little bit, like it's only a handful of years, right? That we've got to get from what we had before this issue to kind of that as the kind of standard weekly, monthly issue of what to expect. Yeah,
this was like 87, or at least it ended in 87, and Nightfall's like 91, 92.
Yeah, so what? We're looking, 3 to 4 years. Yeah. So it's not that long, really. It might sound like a lot if we say how many issues that is, but it's not really that much. And I do wonder how much of a gradual shift it is, or if this kind of does just drag it forward into that age.
And does Detective drag with it, or is it still the goofier comic that we had the last few issues of? Because that was definitely the goofier of the two.
Oh yeah, definitely.
No question. It's going to be really weird, like going to like the next Detective issue, because that's the next episode we'll be doing. Like
it might feel like Whiplash after this.
it might feel crazy after this. So, but no, that's Batman 404. It's such a weird thing to just sort of judge this issue on its own. But I guess that makes for a fun experiment here to actually look at this as a single issue as opposed to whatever. But honestly, he introduces his two main characters, and I love that Gordon is an equal main character in this book. It's a twofer for sure. And I love the ending is dramatic and big. It's very much he's trying, he's failing, and he just gets the idea. Like, the important idea comes right at the end. I think it's the perfect cliffhanger. So, I mean, it's hard to fault this issue. There's not a lot. I mean, like I say, some of the lettering maybe in Bruce's narration, maybe half a point take for that. And then...
Yeah, I really didn't want to just be a cliche and rate year one stupidly high because it's year one, but there's a reason it's year one.
I if anything, I think I want to rate it higher because I have the context of reading the issues, also before, but also Detective, like reading those Detective issues and then going to this.
Yeah,
like it feels so fresh, and it's funny because obviously we're used to like this type of Batman because we've had it for 30 goddamn years, but it feels fresh after reading a few of those goofier issues. It's like, hey, Batman's here, baby.
It's bizarre to think I read a issue of Tynan's Batman more recently than I did that last issue of Detective that we've done for this show.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this still feels like a reset on my palette.
Yeah. I think that's just a case of, as comic readers, we're really good at keeping the current comics separate in our mind from old stuff we're reading.
Yeah, there's a lot of separation going on, isn't there?
I think that's just something we're used to. But what are you giving it then? What are you rating it?
I'm going to give it a 9.
Yeah, I guess to be at least a 9. I'm only 9.5.
I thought I was going stupidly high.
I feel like it's the perfect first issue for what this story is. It tells you how desperate this is and how much of a desperate world Gordon's in, and the need for something, even if the idea is not there yet. And then that cliffhanger is perfect.
I'll tell you the only bit I'm really knocking points off for, aside from maybe a couple of words in the lettering,
sure.
And I mean individual words, is the little bit with Selena. I wasn't really feeling. I never really feel that as much.
That's sure. If anything, that's the one thing that maybe kind of hasn't continuously been taken from this is the idea that she used to be a prostitute. I feel like that's something that's just kind of like, nah, we don't really take that part.
Yeah, that's the one bit where I'm like, okay, which is probably why I'm giving it a 9 and not the 9.5. But I mean, still a 9.
I actually kind of agree with that. I'm going to go with an 8.5 still because I feel like it's such a...
I mean, I'm not faulting you for giving it a 9.5.